What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Abundance Podcast. I'm your host, Sonia Gomez, and super excited to be here on another rockin' episode. This is the place to be to discuss the areas that I believe are most important in our life: our faith, our family, our finances, and our future. Today, as you know, I hand select every single one of my guests that come on here because they're making an incredible impact in both their lives and their businesses. And in this case, today is no different. Have you ever thought about where your food is coming from, how it gets to your door, more importantly, how it's being cultivated? These things are becoming more and more pressing, more important to be paying attention to. And I can't wait to dive into this conversation today with our guests. But first, I invite you to take a few very small actions. Go ahead and like, share, tag 5 people that you know this episode is going to make a difference for. By taking these very small but highly impactful actions, we've been able to impact millions of people around the world with our message about freedom. And that is my commitment and my mission, is to help you make informed and educated decisions about how you want to care for yourself, the people that you love, conditions that you may be suffering from, and make sure that you have direct access to the best products and services that are available on the marketplace to change your life. Super excited to dive in with me, you guys. Thanks so much for being here. My guest today is Tanner Winterhoff. He was born and raised on a swine and cow crop farm in Northwest Iowa. Tanner attended AIB College of Business in Des Moines, where he earned a degree in business administration and financial services. He spent the next 15 years working in the banking sector, gaining financial insights, and later applying them to the farming sector. Tanner advocates for the adoption of tech and data-driven strategies to improve efficiency and environmental stewardship to the audience of the Farm for Profit podcast as an outlet of farm for profit media. He and his wife are partners, recently opened the recording studio and small event venue space named Studio 205 in Slater, Iowa. When he's not knee-deep in work, Tanner is actively involved as a board member for several charitable organizations like the AMS Foundation. In his free time, he can often be found swinging clubs on the golf course or sipping on some new bourbons. I'll be joining you for a next round of those. My good friend Tanner, thanks so much for being here. Here.
Hey, absolutely. My pleasure. It's always fun to get those introductions put together because it's such a snapshot into what somebody does, but what do you leave out and what do you put in? It's always fun to play around with them.
I like it. I shift mine quite a bit, and depending on the podcast or industry that I'm in, I'm always giving a different background and a different piece of my story. But, you know, life is one big fabric that's made up of a bunch of threads of different experiences. So introductions are all good and well. Quick and dirty, give me the 30,000 foot view of Tanner. Who are you? And tell me a little bit about your podcast.
Yeah, the main focus is we're trying to help farmers achieve higher levels of profitability, which in turn is sustainable. I mean, that you talk sustainability and that be a buzzword topic throughout many industries. What's one thing that we can do to make sure our American farmers are sustainable? Well, we need to make sure that they're here next year. We need to make sure that they're here next month. So a lot of our content is driven to help farmers get that information, whether it's expert advice, lifelong stories, stories of failures, stories of successes. It's our job to put that information into our audience's ears and eyes as we will, do both podcast and video production. And as 3 co-hosts on the show, all of us farm. So in the interim, we're out playing in the dirt or the manure or whatever it is to make sure that our real world experience, brings that kind of value.
Love this topic so much because a lot of the focus of over the last 12 months for me has been bringing to light not only my chosen lifestyle, but really to help empower the consumers on behalf of the farming industry, because I think that there's such a disconnect. Like, we drive our SUVs to the grocery store and we throw some, produce into our carts and check out of the grocery store. Pretty robotic and scheduled, regimented way of acquiring our food. There's a little to no connection to the source of our food, and our farm community, much like our trades community in America, is under siege right now. The average farmer is well into their 60s. The next generation is uninterested in taking it over. And more, we're seeing imports take over what could be a thriving food system inside of the United States. Now, a lot of what we've been focusing on is regenerative farming, rejuvenating health in the soil, rebuilding biological health in the soil, and really creating that full ecosystem. Everything starts with the water and grows from there. I'd love to hear from you. What are some of your top strategies that you're working with farmers right now that are helping them not only sustain, but maintain and then grow into profitability?
Yeah, the consumer has so much power. I mean, just like you said, whether it's buying from Amazon or buying from a local business, it's the same situation as to if they buy their meat at the meat counter or they buy it prepackaged in a ship to your door plan, or they contact a local farmer or local meat locker to source it exactly where they know it's coming from. They drive everything that happens in agriculture. So it's a tricky balance, because when you look at population, farmers are a very small percentage of the overall world population, let alone the U.S. population. So it's a small number of voices trying to make an impact in a large number of consumers. And the biggest message that farmers have to say, and then I'll get into what we're telling our audience, is we care. Farmers care because it's our livelihood. And if you didn't care, if you neglected a flower out in your flower bed, it's going to die and you won't have a flower again. If you neglect your lawn's not going to perform and look green the way that you want it to. If you neglect the furnace in your house, it's not going to perform the way that you want it to. So farmers care about their animals, care about their crops, and care about the resources that they need to put all of that into their livelihood. So there's very few. Of course, there's always going to be a bad actor. There's, someone that bets on professional basketball game when they're not supposed to bet on a professional basketball game as an athlete. But most athletes care about the industry that they're in. Same thing with farmers. So what we really have focused our message around is you have to run a farm like a business anymore. Back in the good old days, it was grandpa's farm that got handed down to his boys because they had 12 kids, but they had to have 12 kids to do all of the work that was needed. And an entire community would come together and they'd work at harvest and the calf crop, and they'd shear sheep, and everybody would do something as a community. It's not that way anymore in agriculture. So now you have to look at it as a business. Our tagline is, if you aren't farming for profit, you won't be farming for long. And it's not meant to be a money grab. It's not meant to say, let's go be egotistical and greedy and let's go get as much profit as possible. Yeah, that's what you do when you run a business. That's not the point of the message. If you make more money than you spend, you'll have money left over to do it again the next time. So the basic message that we start off with is you have to understand what it costs to produce the food that you're growing and what you're going to get paid in return. And that goes back to that consumer-driven conversation that I started off with, is if you can establish some great relationships with local consumers, you're going to keep more of that profit than if you're going to put it into a supply chain that goes 4 or 5 different steps before it gets to the grocery store. So the first thing that we talk about, and the advice that we give farmers, goes for any business owner. You have to understand your data, whether that's where your customers are coming from, or what your input costs are, or how much you can sell it for, or what your opportunity is and size of market.
Today is no different. Have you ever thought about where your food is coming from, how it gets to your door, more importantly, how it's being cultivated? These things are becoming more and more pressing, more important to be paying attention to, and I can't wait to dive into this conversation today with our guests. But first, I invite you to take a few very small actions. Go ahead and like, share, tag 5 people that you know this episode is going to make a difference for. By taking these very small but highly impactful actions, we've been able to impact millions of people around the world with our message about freedom. And that is my commitment and my mission, is to help you make informed and educated decisions about how you want to care for yourself, the people that you love, conditions that you may be suffering from, and make sure that you have direct access to the best products and services that are available on the marketplace to change your life. Super excited to dive in with me, you guys. Thanks so much for being here. My guest today is Tanner Winterhoff. He was born and raised on a swine and cow crop farm in Northwest Iowa. Tanner attended AIB College of Business in Des Moines, where he earned a degree in business administration and financial services. He spent the next 15 years working in the banking sector, gaining financial insights, and later applying them to the farming sector. Tanner advocates for the adoption of tech and data-driven strategies to improve efficiency and environmental stewardship to the audience of the Farm for Profit podcast as an outlet of farm for profit media. He and his wife our partners recently opened the recording studio and small event venue space named Studio 205 in Slater, Iowa. When he's not knee deep in work, Tanner is actively involved as a board member for several charitable organizations like the AMS Foundation. In his free time, he can often be found swinging clubs on the golf course or sipping on some new bourbons. I'll be joining you for a next round of those. My good friend Tanner, thanks so much for being here. I like it. I shift mine quite a bit, and depending on the podcast or industry that I'm in, I'm always giving a different background and a different piece of my story. But life is one big fabric that's made up of a bunch of threads of different experiences. So introductions are all good and well. Quick and dirty, give me the 30,000-foot view of Tanner. Who are you? And tell me a little bit about your podcast. I love this topic so much because a lot of the focus of over the last 12 months for me has been bringing to light not only my chosen lifestyle, but really to help empower the consumers on behalf of the farming industry. Because I think that there's such a disconnect. Like we drive our SUVs to the grocery store and we throw some produce into our carts and check out of the grocery store. There's a pretty robotic and scheduled, regimented way of acquiring our food. There's little to no connection to the source of our food, and our farm community, much like our trades community in America, is under siege right now. The average farmer is well into their 60s. The next generation is uninterested in taking it over. And more, we're seeing imports take over what could be a thriving food system inside of the United States. Now, a lot of what we've been focusing on is regenerative farming, rejuvenating health in the soil, rebuilding biological health in the soil, and really creating that full ecosystem. Everything starts with the water and grows from there. I'd love to hear from you. What are some of your top strategies that you're working with farmers right now that are helping them not only sustain, but maintain and then grow into profitability? Mhm. Mhm.
We really break that down and have a lot of experts talk about it. And then we also bring in a lot of the latest technology that's available. You mentioned keeping a really close eye on the microbiology that's in the soil. It's the same for livestock. There is so much technology and science and research that's been put into what you put into the diet. It's the same way with us, right? There are all kinds of pieces of information as to what you and I should be eating to be the healthiest and high performing individuals possible. The same thing goes for a cow or a pig or a corn plant. So understanding that maybe we don't have to use synthetic fertilizers, or maybe there's an opportunity to where we want to use a synthetic based upon cost of production and consumer demand and what the market's asking for. But then if we're going to do that, what's going to fall off? What are we going to have to replace? What type of biology are we going to have to entice to replace what happened? So we bring in lots of experts on agronomy, veterinarians. We bring in those that are leading the industries forward to let us know this could be something for you to look into. Very rarely do we ever sit here and say, hey, farmer A, if you don't do this, your business will fail. That's never the case because everybody's different. Same goes for every farm.
I found that regionally, this quest for unity amongst the food economy is deepening, and the voices are getting louder. It's been really interesting to collaborate with some of the members and leaders inside of the food soil web, seeing how biocomplete compost is starting to gain popularity as an approach. How in many cases we see industrial level farmers incorporating regenerative practices in order to rejuvenate the health in their farmland and therefore protect and preserve their legacy. So they actually have farmable land to pass on to the next generation. We're also seeing the incorporation and kind of partnering, like you said, with technology and synthetic based fertilizers. In between the treatments with the fertilizers, they're bringing in this biocomplete inoculants. And it's pretty interesting to see the results. We're seeing anywhere from 30 up to 75% savings in the farmers when they switch to this modality. And that's true for livestock. That's true for hay fields. That's true for corn. And it's been so interesting to get to know the farm community because, like you said, they're families, they're legacy families. They're trying to reignite and re-engage the next generation in what has been a generational caretaking of their community, of their families, and here in the United States. I got to ask you though, because I don't think yet that the voices of our farm community are spoken loud enough that the consumers even understand the impact. We, on a very surface level, are cruising around, and I say we, I'm not a part of this group. I don't even like Starbucks, but the mass majority are cruising around with their cups of Starbucks, going to brunch with their girlfriends, complaining about inflation and gas prices and food prices, and again, are completely disconnected. What is it looking like behind the scenes for the U.S. food economy economy and the farm communities. Being in an election year, I know that there's a lot of consciousness around the controversy of, who could be president, how that's going to affect, the consumer community or the American people. Do you have a pulse on how the current state of affairs is affecting the farm community and what the ripple effect of that could look like for consumers?
There's a lot of frustration in the farm community right now, and there's a lot of factors. We don't ever dive into politics on farm for profit because we can't control it. But you're correct. There is a power in the consumer's voice as lobbyists from different industries and from individuals and how votes are casted that can certainly play into things. One of the biggest buzzwords that the ag industry is dealing with right now is emissions, carbon. What are we doing to reduce our CO2 emittance? How are we controlling what that emission standard looks like? And the USDA actually just came out with their results that from 2022 to 2023, the ag sector lowered their carbon emissions by 1.8% in a 12-month time period. That's not a lot, but that's almost a 2% drop when the total carbon emissions over that year went up nearly 7%. So all other industry sectors potentially provided either a stagnant movement or an increase in their emissions, and the agricultural sector is lowering theirs. And that's happening a lot of different ways. The struggle is there's not clarity as to how this carbon credit, I'm using air quotes for those that aren't watching us, how carbon credits are being marketed and passed along and so on and so forth. To explain what a carbon credit is if you are emitting carbon, if you have a business that is producing and releasing carbon into the atmosphere, there's an opportunity for you to offset that financially by rewarding an industry that has a negative or a neutral carbon footprint. Agriculture is one of those industries that has the opportunity to be negative or neutral because plants sequester carbon. They're a natural conversion. Trees, corn, grass, everything that is green uses carbon, so it's pulling carbon out of the atmosphere. The other part of this is ethanol, which is a huge byproduct of the nation's fuel that you put into your car, is grown with corn that sequesters carbon. But during that process, CO2 is generated. So turning corn into ethanol produces CO2, but we've got technology available that can sequester that, potentially making that an extremely sustainable fuel source that can go into aviation fuel, which is one of the highest polluting industries across America. But there's no clear track right now due to the policies in place as to who gets rewarded and how they get rewarded. And ultimately, when that gets clarified, it's going to incentivize farmers to raise products such as corn, in a fashion that's going to be even more environmentally friendly. That's policy that takes time, but that's policy that takes a little bit of motivation from the general public to push it along a little bit faster. Otherwise, it gets put on the back burner. The Farm Bill was supposed to be done last October, and then we were told they're going to have a Farm Bill by March, and now we're supposed to have something by the end of May, and there's no way. But that's another policy that isn't being put to the forefront because of other factors that are being deemed more important. People only have so many hours in the day to put things into their priority bucket list. We just got a headline that President Biden released and is now approving imports of beef from Paraguay. Why? We have beef in the United States. We don't have the demand. Well, the why is consumers are demanding lower cost food. And we can get beef from Paraguay at a lower cost because their quality of life, their demand for price, their cost of production happens to be lower than the American farmer at this time. But that's not and doesn't mean that it's always going to be the right answer. That low cost food demand is something that creates a barrier because sometimes, like you were stating, the reduction of a synthetic fertilizer, which is typically the cheapest option, means that our expenses raise. And if our expenses go up, we have to, like we're preaching on Farm for Profit, raise the price that we need to sell our product for in order to make a profit and be sustainable in the pure definition of being around tomorrow. So it's a little bit of a disconnect. My wife's family, my in-laws, for example, use cow manure as the source of P and K, a type of fertilizer, on every farmland acre that we farm. So there is no synthetic fertilizer bought for those types of nutrients that go into the soil. We aren't a poster child. That happens all across the country. That is a very natural process of making sure that our soils are taken care of. But it's different than some farmers that have to buy all synthetic fertilizer. So there's going to be a time here in the next couple of years to where that's going to get clarified, and that's going to provide a lot of opportunities. We also know that there are individuals across this industry that are continuing to work more on traceability. If you go and you scan your package at the grocery store with a QR code, it'll tell you what farm it came from and who the farmer was and what it was raised. So technology is coming. But when the consumer demand is voicing and being concerned about cow farts, for example, as a methane production, we're putting CO2 into the atmosphere and cows are bad. Well, no, cows are one of the most efficient conversions of plant into meat that you can have. But scientific research does show that in a fart, it does contain a gas, and that gas goes into the atmosphere, right? So it's amazing how a collective of voices can affect an industry, even if there's not a whole lot of education. So it's a tough gap to fill because you can get information from so many sources and what's right.
Not kidding there. I'm going to shift for a second to the business side of farming, because that is, I can tell, something that lights you up. It's your part of your core business and conversation with the podcast. And over the last year, I've had the great pleasure and really interesting sort of education that has allowed me to get to know many of the micro farmers or aspiring farmers, homesteaders, the people who are breaking out of the suburban hell and onto their own piece of farmland. And they're starting with, the what I call the gateway drug to farming. They got a handful of chickens, and they got their little goat out there and they're doing their thing. I was really fortunate to have a local food economy when I was raising my first three kiddos. Several micro farms around me, and we got to trade goods amongst us. But I'm also, as a part of my business, help with building community and commerce online. And so a lot of these micro farmers have wanted to figure out how they can create a direct to consumer product and capture enough profitability that they can self-sustain and then grow into a more well-known food brand. It's been really interesting to watch from state to state. The rules that allow you to do so shift and change. And I wanted to just acknowledge one of the things that you said. No matter what size your farm is, it is in fact a business, and it has to make dollars and cents so that you can self-sustain and then maintain in order to grow. So I would love to hear from you when you're thinking about your micro farms all the way up to your macro farms. What are three key pieces of advice that you are giving them when they want to capture as much profitability, continue to build their brand and impact, and create systems for sustainability?
I love that question. And it'll be hard to limit to three, right? We've got over 350 episodes on Farm for Profit. I started Farm for Profit in 2014, and it started as an in-person conference. And during that time, I was a banker. I was a lender. And the reason I started it is I wanted to provide insight so that way my customers were going to repay me. I wanted to get my loan money back. I wanted to make sure they had the best chance of paying me back and give them a competitive edge. And it grew and it grew, and people demanded it be more often. And that's why the podcast launched. We've had the pleasure of talking to experts from all across the industry, from in and outside of agriculture, that have kind of helped us put this together. Homesteaders are in a tough category because agriculture is an industry of scale. Typically, the more cows you have or the more acres of crop ground you have, the better potential you have for a living wage, because then your margins can be a little bit smaller. And you just, almost the Walmart style compared to another industry where you have the movement of a lot of product at a small margin versus the movement of a little bit of product at a larger margin. So as I dive into this, the three pieces of advice, the first one we start off with is you have to have an advisory. And we've talked about this on Farm for Profit over and over again. And your advisory team is going to look different than your neighbors and the next farmer and the next homesteader. But ultimately, you need to look at where your weaknesses. For example, if you hate bookwork, if you hate the numbers side of a business, then you probably should have an accountant or a financial advisor on your advisory. If you don't understand the rules and regulations of your area, well, you probably need an attorney on your advisory. If you don't have the capital that you need, then you're going to need a banker or an investor or somebody along those lines that can give you the advice that you need. Same thing, you might need a vet if you're going to do livestock. You might need an agronomist if you're going to grow various crops. You may even want to bring in a CEO from a business outside of agriculture that has experience leading people or creating a strong marketing team. You look at where your gaps are and put an advisory team together and employ them for you. I will tell you the easiest place to start with an advisory team is the people who already do business. They're invested in you because guess what? If your business isn't around next year, they don't have another. You need to grow outside of that advisory team. So that's the easy place to start. Once you end up establishing a business that gets a little bit more profitable, you can start paying board members. I mean, you look at some of the largest and best run companies in America, They have full-time board positions to where their board members are paid to give the advice. They are paid to be there. It's a way to make sure that you get their undivided attention, and they are going to give you the best advice that they have to offer. So the first thing I say is you got to build an advisory team. If you want to start off easy, it might be grandpa and your neighbor and your banker, whoever it is, but you got to have people with a clear understanding of what you're asking them to come together and focus on what you're doing and give you advice. You don't always have to take their advice, but if you trust these people to begin with, their advice is probably going to be pretty solid. Secondly, you need to identify what your focus is going to be. We tell this to our listeners all the time. If you are going to be a cattle farm that grows sustainable food for your livestock, and you're going to focus on selling your meat as the highest quality of meat that you can possibly have, then don't go buy pigs. Then don't farm ground that you're not going to use as feed stuff for your animals. Once you have a clear understanding of what your business is going to be, if it's a homesteader and you are going to have asparagus in the spring and you're going to then follow that up with a summer strawberry crop and you're also going to have a you-pick pumpkin patch in the fall, great. Don't grow corn. Don't invest in pot-bellied pigs unless you have a way of bringing that type of a business avenue into your overall model and mission. If your mission is I want to provide leafy greens to my county or my community or the farmer's market, then you should probably grow leafy greens and not worry about something that may distract you. Don't get too pigeonholed because you could miss an opportunity, but if your focus is extremely clear, you can develop a mission statement and you can develop a reason for your business, and it also makes it really easy to sell yourself to other people. Because if you know that Farm for Profit is here to help farms achieve higher levels of profitability, become the ultimate sustainable source of food for America, I can say no to a guest that's asking to be on my podcast if it doesn't fit my mission statement. And I don't have to feel bad about it. My response can be, I don't feel this interview is going to help my listeners achieve higher levels of profitability. Or I can go chase somebody because all of a sudden I just discovered that we've got an awesome potential to have someone in here to share earth-shattering news that might be coming from across industry and give my audience, a little insight or a tip or something that they might be able to do. So have your board, have very clear focus on what you're doing. And then I already gave the advice about knowing your numbers. So I'm going to skip that and allow yourself to work on the business and not in it. So kind of getting four, right? We already talked about numbers, but you have to do some strategic planning. And this was one of the hardest things that I had to do for Farm for Profit because I started Farm for Profit while I was still a full-time banker. And if that's the case, you're working in somebody else's business. And the way I handled it is I was fully invested in my customers. So you're working for their businesses and then you come and run your own business. You didn't get a lot of time to put some strategy together. Didn't get to schedule the way you were going to do your meetings. You didn't get to pick the best hybrids that you're going to have. You didn't get to understand that, this is actually a money losing segment of what's going on. So you have to provide that opportunity for yourself to make it okay to not check things off your to-do list today, but to analyze what you've done and what's going well and what isn't. Give yourself the permission to be outside for a period of time, monthly, quarterly, whatever works for you, to put a strong plan together for going forward.
Such good advice. And I'll reciprocate because I tend to work on the flip side with more homesteader micro farmers, small farms that are looking to make a big change and transition into regenerative farming, but with a sustainable plan. And so I have really similar perspective and advice or directive to follow. I think, first of all, everything starts with the right mentor, the right team behind you. It's modeling success is the accelerated version to get to the result that you're looking for. If you try and go at things on your own, like looking at a mountain and you want to climb to the top and there's all of these different landscapes and things that you have to navigate on the path, it's going to be really super challenging. Whereas if you have a coach, a mentor, a board of advisors, somebody that you can call on who has already navigated the path, who knows what the toolkit looks like, who knows what the challenges are going to be, who understands what the opportunities are, you can really fast track your success. And so I can't stand behind that particular bullet point enough. And I know that there's a lot of farmers who, with their pride, and in protection of their legacy and out of consideration for the future coming, don't want to change things. To them, farming is jumping on the tractor and cruising. To them is managing weeds or buying the fertilizer or just doing what has been done over and over and over again. But that's also the definition of insanity. And I see a lot of families literally going crazy, especially my generation, who are watching their fathers and grandparents, perpetuate a challenge when in fact they're just a few small decisions away from a completely different reality
I
on their
love that.
farms.
I want to add into that because our audience is thirsting for that. Because you're right. So much has been just done that way in the past, and it's really hard to get somebody to change. But
Yeah.
we've identified all kinds of ways to partner because it used to be that way. I think I said in the first 5 minutes of this podcast, it used to be that way in agriculture, and now so much it is viewed as competition. You don't tell your secret to the neighbor because they may go after that land or that opportunity to be, more profitable for their livestock operation for fear of them damaging your business. So there's not partnerships. But, for example, you can Chop Local in the region is a website, a program that's almost like a cooperative that you can sell your products online. It's already got an audience base. We've got Farmer Grade is another podcast host that has created a direct to consumer meat box that if you had livestock or, chicken that you wanted to get to consumers, you can partner up with other people to make things like that happen. And then we do so many episodes on succession planning. It's the same way with an electrical business, a plumber, somebody that does repairs, or a sales business. It's the way I've always done it, and I don't know if I trust little Johnny, or I don't know if little Johnny is ready for the stress and all of these things. And what they don't realize is that little Johnny already has stress. It's just different because they don't have answers. And one of the things that Elaine Fraze, one of our favorite guests that we've ever had on, says is you got to write a letter. You have to start off with a letter that allows the successor to disarm themselves, because you're not going to get into a confrontation. You can't argue with a letter. You got to read a letter. You can't immediately argue. And with a letter, you ask for a letter in return. And now you have two pieces of paper that have allowed you to thoughtfully convey concerns, questions, and ideas that are not meant to be offensive, but meant to open a line of communication. And now you have two letters from each side, and now you can have your conversation. And the first conversation is you are only allowed to talk about the things that are in the letter. So if you didn't type it in the letter, you don't get to talk about it. And that's how you can start the conversation. You earn respect, you earn trust through performance. If you can achieve a couple of things at a time, all of a sudden you might be able to switch the direction of an operation.
Couldn't agree more. And that really brings me into the planning phase, because that's one of the first areas that I think are really super important. Perhaps even and the sequence in which you adopt these two things that we just spoke about, mentorship or having this board of advisors versus your plan. To me, sometimes everything starts with the dream. And, what would it be like? What would it feel like? What would your experience be if you could have things the exact way that you wanted it? And once you can articulate and describe and define what your dream is, it's pretty easy from there to reverse engineer what is necessary in order to see that come to fruition. Now you can really start to think about where you're going to go, what you're going to grow, who you're going to partner with, what kind of advisors you need on your board. Some people might be making a significant shift from the crop or just in the farming practices, where others are planning out their neighborhood garden for the first time. We have a friend, for instance, over in Colorado who runs a 40-acre homestead and sells direct to consumer Palisade peach finished pork, and is getting top dollar for his product, and has an incredible work to own system going on his land, and is revitalizing dry lands with all of these different regenerative practices. And the story alone, all stemming from the vision that he had and how he was able to reverse engineer and implement one thing at a time, one season at a time, to see the whole thing realized. And the different mentors, the different contributors, the different partnerships that he's been able to cultivate because he had such a strong and clear vision have just been incredible, and therefore accelerated his success in the things that he's doing. Um, so I can't help but feel like really having that dream and getting your design together so that you can articulate and reverse engineer what steps are necessary and what time periods to get your end result. And then the final thing that I'll say is, we kind of tread the lines of controversy because we create direct to consumer brands that do not follow industrial farm legislative uh rulings, I guess. The things that limit you from practicing the farm tactics that you want to utilize, the things that limit you from selling an unvaccinated cow or chicken or a piece of pork or whatever. all of these different limitations that restrict us from building local food economies and growing direct to consumer businesses, we fall under the guise of private membership associations and actually promote this idea of quote unquote not for sale. And I, outside of being political, we can definitely see that there's a significant divide happening right now. And I'll tell you this. I will tell you this, the people who value their health, their freedom, the people who really value being able to make informed choices, there, and I won't define which side of this that I'm on, but I will say that we've seen a significant uptick to direct to consumer membership based food communities, and we're seeing quite a few industrial farmers starting to take the plunge where they're shifting their farming practices into more quote unquote controversial or regenerative, not commercial methods of food production, and joining into these private membership associations. And it's been pretty incredible to see. Now, I'll also admit that I'm in Florida. So that is a microcosm of a special type of people that live down here. So it's probably because I am in that environment that I'm seeing so much of it. But I saw it in Colorado. I moved out of California, which was the mecca of organic, rejuvenative farming practices and land restoration. And it's just really remarkable to see that all the way over here on the other side of the coast, the standard, the questions, the requirements that the consumers are asking for and requiring from their farm and food community is completely shifted. And that's one of the areas that I'm really passionate about, is educating and empowering the consumer to understand the difference and to start to make choices to support the local farmers and the industrial level farmers, because hello, without them we're not eating. So it's an emergency in my opinion. Like, we as the consumer community is more educated, more empowered, more informed, and has easier access to the products that we want, allows us to make informed choices about where we're sourcing and what we're sourcing, I think is an important thing. So I get your plan in place, put your dream design in place, get the mentorship or the posse behind you so that you have good support, and absolutely think about what it would be like to build a direct to consumer track, even if the majority of your business is coming from wholesale relationships.
Yeah, it's fascinating to think about the way things are shifting, right? And we've said, for example, that we have a direct to consumer demand, but it is still not significant enough for everybody to go to that operation. And does it need to go that way? It won't ever, right? But to think about it, one question we don't preach it on our podcast, but if you think about is like with my family operation, if somebody wanted to come buy beef from us, we would have no problem selling them beef because we eat the beef we raise. If we feel that it is healthy enough or raised in a manner in which we were comfortable eating it, I think we'd feel pretty bad if it was the opposite. So if you ever run into a producer that you ask, hey, do you eat this? And they say no, correct. Let's move on down the pipeline, or maybe ask some more questions, right? But, we do 2 episodes a week. Monday and Thursday. Thursday, we call them Farm for Fun episodes, and it's meant to be talking to farmers like you're at a coffee shop or at a bar. Sometimes we have a cup of coffee, sometimes we have a can of beer or a cocktail, and we allow our listeners to learn through their stories. And so many of these farmers are doing the best that they can to spread the information. Quote unquote influencers or creators. Maybe they've got a YouTube channel or a TikTok account, or they're doing a lot of different public speaking events. But if your audience wants to get to know where their food comes from, have them pop over and listen to a Farm for Fun show. But the cool part is it's just like our nation's teachers. We got to invest in certain areas. You talked about the trades early on in the show. We as consumers, and I do my best to do this as well, have to invest in some key areas in this nation if we don't want to become dependent on some other areas. I mean, I could go so far in depth on the succession planning topic. I could go so far in depth on sales strategies and negotiation. And all of that's already been talked about on the podcast, so I won't today. But ultimately, if you identify, just as Sonia said, of someone who cares about what you eat and where it comes from, you have to lobby for the farmers just like we're trying to lobby for ourselves. Because we know, as I preach, the only sustainable way to produce food is to make sure that our growers are going to be able to produce it next season.
I can't agree with you more. This conversation is so fascinating. And while I was listening to your podcast and recommending it to a few of the people that we were talking to, because you give really clear, concise, and most importantly, consistent messaging around what's necessary. And I think it's applicable for any farm, any family, any business. And because I work in multiple industries and multiple spaces, just in the last year, we've been dedicating ourselves to our project Abundant Acres, where we're helping families build out family compounds, sovereign food systems, and in some cases, multiple streams of income on their property, which means that they might incorporate a membership-based food community, a CSA, a market garden, things of this nature. And as a result of that, we've attracted many legacy farmers who want to make a safe and sustainable transition into regenerative or restorative farming. However, your podcast has been an incredible beacon of light for us and many of the people that we're thinking about, because in a lot of ways, we haven't worked on that industrial side. So just gaining the insight, knowing what's out there, knowing, I say level up, look a couple levels beyond where you are or where you want to be to get the most pertinent information that you can apply. I asked you to come on because your voice has been so important in influencing how farmers are not only taking a stand, but navigating their path and moving forward. And as a mom of four, as a wife, as the nurturer and nourisher of my family, I really consider, the sustainability, but also accessibility of food and farmland, because hello, that's where our food comes from, is the farmland in the USA. And there's a lot of propaganda out there that would suggest that for many ways, our farmland is under siege right now and being threatened by laboratory grown foods or lab meats or, all of these different things. Instead of fear mongering, I wanted to be able to have this conversation front and centered so that the farmers, the families, the people who are out there thinking about this topic right now have direct access. I know that you're still hosting events. I know that you still have your podcast. I'd love for you to share the different places and spaces that folks can follow along with you and your work.
Yeah, I appreciate that opportunity. I appreciate the invite to be on your podcast. Never take these invitations for granted. We, as in the three of us that co-host, Corey, David, and myself, don't consider ourselves influencers. We like to interview those that influence the industry and share their message, give them that platform to the theory, the topic, the tip, or to be able to provide listeners the opportunity to learn it. We are farm for profit. It's a number 4 in the middle of it. It's the smartest and dumbest thing that we've ever done. It makes it easy because if you type FARM and the number 4, it starts to pop up. But I have to remind everybody when I talk about it that it's the number 4 and it's not the word. So blessing and a curse all at the same time. But anywhere you listen to a podcast, whether it's Apple or Spotify or Google Play or iHeartRadio, you can find the podcast. We're also on YouTube if you want to watch our ugs talk while you're listening. You can come to. We're on every social platform. We love making our shorts on TikTok. But ultimately, yes, FARM, the number 4, it's going to pop up and you'll be able to take in our information. We love to go to trade shows. Most of them are agriculture trade shows if you want to meet us in. But if you're out and about, we really enjoy that. And I do thank you, Sonia, for the opportunity to be on your podcast.
So you guys, if you have not dove into the Farm for Profit podcast, you're considering homesteading, you are an industrial farmer, you are interested in building more profitability for your family, for your legacy through the work that you're doing on your land. This has been an incredible resource for me and all the work that I'm doing on my side, but also for our clients and our followers who have been listening in as I have been sharing and recommending this particular podcast. So it's such an honor. It's such a pleasure, Tanner, to have you here on the show. Maybe one day we can talk about regenerative farm and how it's saving money for farmers across America on your podcast. Really excited to continue the collaboration and continue to follow your work. And any final words for our farmers or families who are listening?
We just end every one of our episodes with either a crack a beer or enjoy a beverage because you deserve it. Whether you enjoy an alcoholic cocktail or have a favorite coffee, take time for yourself because your mental health is key to the success of your business. I'm not going to turn into a big soapbox, but pay attention to you, your friends, and your neighbors, because if you can have a little bit of a way to provide insight into their day or a smile on their face, you never know what you can do to help them out.
Love it. Hey, Abundance Podcast listeners, thank you so much for tuning in with us today. As you know, I hand select every one of my guests because they are making an incredible impact in their life and in their industry and in their community. In this case, we're hitting all three of those notes. I'm your host, Sonia Gomez, and as you know, I am on a mission to empower you with the truth so that you can make informed and educated decisions about how you care for yourself and your loved ones. We cover the 4 areas that I believe are most important in our life: our families, our finances, our faith, and our future. Go ahead and take a few small actions for me right now. Like, share, tag 5 people that you believe this will make a difference for. By taking these small actions, we've been able to impact millions of people worldwide. And I am thanking you from the bottom of my heart for following along in this incredible journey. I'm your host, Sonia Gomez, and we'll see you on our next episode of the Abundance Podcast. Bye for now.